Hey crafty people, welcome back to my channel, and in case you're new here, I'm Sarah, also known as Craft Nerd because I'm a nerd who loves to craft. I do paper crafting, card making, junk journaling, and mixed media art. Let's get crafting! Okay, so I want to work on a junk journal cover for one of my sewing themed journals that I'm working on. And I've got some pattern paper that I want to use to cover this Amazon mailer. Now I've cut this down to the size I want, which is 14 by 9, so that it's folded in half. It's 7 by 9, because then that gives me a good inch for the spine when I sew in my signatures. And I put the outside to the inside when I am working on these, and will sew, especially since this is for a sewing journal, the pieces together. And I am just going to take one piece at a time, and I'm going to use matte medium, and I've got a dish off to the side to put my matte medium on. And I've been debating how I want to approach this, and I think I want to add texture as well. So I'm going to do it in layers, and I'm not going to be too worried about, like, I want the crinkles. So I'm going to crinkle it up as well as when I'm adding it. And I'm probably going to just rip and have some overlaps. So to give it some interest. And I'm not going to be all that worried about how neat I am in applying it. And I am going to wrap around so that since I've cut this apart, I don't have finished edges anymore on the mailer. So I will be wrapping the pages over the top and sides, and I will put a layer on top. And again, I kind of like that it's going to be lumpy, bumpy, textury, so I'm not worried about that at all. And I'm just going to cover this whole thing, and I will probably speed up the footage because, yeah, I'm just adding this on top. So this is going to be the first layer of what we're creating for this cover. So as I said, I'm wrapping over my edges. But it doesn't matter what it looks like on this side because this is going to get sewn to the other piece. I'm just going to grab some scissors and miter off our corner over here. Find my scissors. Here, there. I need another piece over here because I didn't manage to leave enough for wrapping the corner. I'm just gonna use a little piece, stick it on, again, I'm gonna clip across the corner like that to miter my corners and wrap. Okay, so it's fully covered and it's very wet and very flimsy and wobbly right now, but it will firm up as it dries. So I'm going to set this aside to dry. I'm going to do the exact same thing for the inside, and just get it covered with the pattern paper, and I will be back when everything is done and dried. All right, so my inside and outside cover pieces are dry, and I want to add a little bit of color. So I'm going to take some Distress Oxide ink in Victorian Velvet and kind of brush that along just to add a little bit of color. And it kind of catches on the raised parts, but I think I want to blend it in a little bit. I'm going to grab a makeup sponge and kind of just blend it in a little bit more so it's not just like sitting right there. And I'm going to do the same on the inside. Now on the inside, I am going to add a lace pocket. And this is a sleeve from a dress I got at, a thrift store near me. And so I am going to trim it down. Just wide enough that I'll be able to wrap the ends around to create the pocket. I think I'm going to cut along here, which kind of gives me a straight-ish line for the top of the pocket. Just making sure it's not going to be frayy. And so that's gonna wrap around and then wrap like that to create a pocket like that for our inside. And then for the front, before I go to stitching this whole thing together, I was thinking I want to do some hand stitching on it. I'm also still debating whether I want to perhaps add a little bit of the lace like along the edge. I just don't know. And I really can't hear what you're saying as to whether or not I should add it. I just can't decide. I will at some point make that decision. But for my hand stitching, I want to give myself kind of a guide. So I have pulled out some stamps, and this is Tim Holtz and Stampers Anonymous Wildflowers CMS 253. And what I'm gonna do is stamp it in vintage photo, because I don't necessarily want it to be like really dark and showing up. I just want it to be a guide for me when I go to do my stitching. So I really just want it to blend in the background after I do the stitching. Oh, I did not get nearly enough of that stamped on there. Probably because this is all lumpy bumpy and this is not, you know, the best surface for stamping on. I just want to get a little bit more of an impression on there. Well, that's not going to be as good of a guide as I was hoping for, but I can work with it. Because again, it's not the stamping so much that I want to have show up. I want the stamping to serve as a guide for my stitching. So I'm going to hit this with my heat gun. So I've gone ahead and taken out some green embroidery floss. I've already threaded my needle, tied the knot, because let's face it, I can't see well enough to do this on camera for you. And what I'm going to do is, just to kind of give me a starting point, I'm going to poke it in from the front, but come up from the back. And I'm just going to show you a little bit of what I'm planning on doing, because if I stitch the whole thing, we'll be here for 3 days. Not quite, but it'll take me a while, especially doing it on camera. Boy. For the stems, I'm probably just going to do straight stitch, outline stitch, back stitch, whatever the heck the stitch is called. And just so it's pretty much fairly straightforward stitching, just going up in a line along the stem. So that's basically what I'm going to do for the stem. Now I've come to, there are leaves on this one. So what I think I'm going to do for the leaves. Okay, so I realized as I was editing this video, you could not see my stitching of the leaves at all. And that's what they look like all finished. So we're gonna do a redo. So I've got just a piece of paper, needle and thread, and I went ahead and poked holes to make this easier since I'm just using a piece of paper instead of fabric. So I'm gonna go up and do the center line for the leaf, as I did for the ones on the cover. Then I'm gonna come up to the left of that center line. And then I'm going to go back down along the center line, but being sure I do my stitch over the line. So there you go, like that. So this is what it looks like. Then I'm gonna come up pretty much across from where I came up for this stitch, and I'm gonna come through. I'm gonna go back down the hole along the center line, but I'm gonna be sure my needle crosses over the center stitch there so that it goes like that. So that's what we have. And then as I go down the leaf, I'm gonna go out a little further to make the stitches a little longer. So we're gonna do another stitch crossing over the center stitch. Then for this one, let's see if I can get the needle to go through. And again, I'm gonna be sure I go back down the same hole, but on the other side of the center stitch. And again. And again, each stitch crosses over the center stitch. So that's what it looks like all finished. So each stitch is crossing the center line. And so here's how it looked finished on the junk journal cover. I'm debating here whether I want to start the flowers or finish putting in the stem and then come back and show you what I'm doing for the flowers. I think I'm going to do that because I think that will be a little bit easier, but stitching on camera is not the easiest thing in the world for me to do because my eyesight's not the greatest. So I'm going to finish stitching, come back and show you, or finish stitching the stems and the leaves, come back and show you what I'm going to do with the flowers. So I've got all of the green stitching done, and I went ahead and poked holes to help me out for doing this flower. And I've got some pink thread on my needle, and I'm going to start in the middle. And what I plan on doing is long stitches to all of the various spots along the edge. I'm going to start with that. Just be careful when you go back through the center hole that you don't poke your needle through the knot like I did. I'm just straightening that up, or tightening that up, and I'm going to go around to all the holes. Okay, I'm going to tie this off and get a longer piece and a shorter needle, and I will explain why in a sec. Okay, because at the end of each of these stitches, I want to do a French knot, and I find it easier to do a French knot with a smaller needle. Now, to do a French knot, you take your thread and wrap it around your needle. And I think for a French knot, it's supposed to only be twice. I like it 3 times. I think it comes out better. And then I'm going to go back down just a little off from where my original hole was, being sure to pull the thread taut over here so that the knot stays wound up, because we're going to pull our needle back through like so. So that gives us a nice little French knot at the end. So I'll show you again. I'm going to come up, take my thread, 1, 2, 3, holding it taut, go back down a little bit over, pull this thread taut so that you keep your little knot when you push your thread back through it. So I am going to do French knots for all of them, and probably one in the center. If you want, you know what, I'll show you one more, and then I'll go off and do the rest of this, and then we'll come back and do those guys. 3 times round, holding it taut, pull through. So that's what they look like when they're finished. I'm wondering how well you can see. All right, I'll do one up in the air, which might be difficult. So I'm going up through the hole. I'm gonna hold my thread. All right, not as easy as doing it flat on the table. 1, 2, 3. Keep your threads on your needle. All right. Sorry about that. This is not the easiest. Kudos to all of those people who do videos showing you how to do stitches. Poked it down a little bit off from my first hole, holding that taut, and going down through. So there you go. That's what you get. All right. I am gonna finish those and figure out what stitches I'm gonna do for the other 2 flowers, and I'll be back. Okay, as you can see, I have finished doing all of our little French knots around that flower, and I've decided what I'm gonna do for both of these. Now for this one, we're gonna do like a little puffy, floofy, flowery thing. So I'm gonna I've got 3 strands of the floss. I am going to wrap it around my finger about half a dozen times. I'm gonna slide it off and hold it in the middle. And then I'm gonna fiddle with it a whole bunch till I get it so that I can snip it off from the strand there. And let's just tuck this guy down. So what I am now gonna do is I'm gonna go over here where we're gonna put our first flower. I've got, I had a threaded needle. No! Let's rethread this. While still holding on to this, this will be challenging. All right, let's thread this needle. There we go. Yay. I always forget I have the needle threader, and as I've gotten older, it's more and more useful to me. You know, it used to be so easy for me to thread a needle. Now, in my mid-40s, my eyesight does not like trying to figure that out. All right, so I'm going to come up. I'm going to place my little bundle of threads down. I am going to stitch over it, trying to keep it even. Apparently we are now at the time of day where they need to bark. Just trying to make sure it's kind of centered like so. And I'm going to do a couple more stitches in there just to make sure it stays tacked down. Now I'm going to pull my loops up and stitch over all of this thread to create the base of the flower. So let me, I'm going to pull out my mouse pad. This way I don't have to worry about stabbing into my mat with my needle. So I'm going to just put a couple of holes in there to make it easier for me to do the stitching. So I'm coming up next to all of the loops, which I'm going to hold up there, and then I'm going to go down on the other side. Making sure I keep my loops up here. I think I need 3 hands for this. So I'm going to do that a few more times, just stitching that in place. All right, I'm going to flip this over so I can see where I put that hole. All right. Again, holding my loops up here while I stitch these down. I'm going to do a few more of those stitches. I don't think I came up in the hole I had made. There we go. Now this is a little bit trickier using like paper as my base because fabric's a little bit more forgiving with putting stitches close together than with the paper, because the holes you poke will heal up in fabric and they won't, oops, got a knot back here, do so with the paper. So you got to be careful, because if you put too many holes close together, they'll just become one big hole. Whereas you've got a little bit more flexibility when stitching on fabric. But you can stitch on something like this. This one is not. How did that get so far out there? All right, I'm going to put one more stitch in. I think I'm going to go through holes I've already got and just reinforce my stitching. Now you of course could do these stitches across the bottom like this in green to give it like a green bottom so that it looks like, you know, the green part of a bud of a flower, but I didn't really want the stitching at the bottom to be all that noticeable. I want it just to be the little floofy at the top. I think that is good. I'm going to tie a knot in the back. Now what we're going to do is cut the loops and then go bring dogs in. Sorry if my head was in the way. I was trying to make sure I got all of the loops. And then of course you can trim off any little pieces that are sticking out more than you want. Give it a little trim. And there we go. We got a little floofy flower. Let me hold it up close so you can get a good look at our floofy little flower. So that's what I'm going to do for the rest of this one, is do floofy flowers all around. So I'm going to do the rest of the flowers off screen, and I think I probably should have put a bigger gap between where this flower and this flower is going to be, but that's all right. I'll work it out. I'll come back after I finish stitching these and show you how that one looks. Now, for this one, I'm going to do something similar to this, but instead of doing single French knots, I'm going to do little French knot clusters. So I'm going to do a couple French knots together. So let me go ahead and quickly stitch these stems on. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. All right, so we'll start over here, and I'm gonna come up right about there. Put in a French knot, then go right about there. Do another French knot. All right, dogs need to come in the house. Now, the reason I'm not going down into the same hole when I make my knots as I would kind of do with fabric is, again, because we're working with paper, I'm afraid that the hole will end up being too big and the knot will like slip through it if I do that. And I'm looking at that, and it needs one right there. Right there. So that's what I'm gonna do for all of these, and I'm gonna finish these guys off, and I'll come back and show you where we're at. Okay, so I finished all of the stitching. I'll hold it up close so you can see. So we got our little fluffy flowers over here, our spiral with the French knots, and then our French knot clusters. So all the stitching is done, and I realized it needed some ground. So I've got a piece of chiffon ribbon and a piece of lace that I'm just gonna glue down on the bottom here to give me a ground. And I'm gonna use Fabri-Tac, and I'm gonna use a little silicone spatula thingy to spread out the Fabri-Tac. And let me lay this out flatter. Okay, so I went and declogged my Fabri-Tac. Do a line. And I'm just going to use this to flatten it out because I don't want to see the lumps and the bumps and have globbies sticking through the chiffon ribbon. And I know I'm overhanging a little. I will snip that off. And then add some to this ribbon in strategic places. Start sticking it down, and of course, because I'm in the middle of gluing something, my dog desperately needs to come in the house right this second. I'm going to take a paper towel to get any excess glue and go let a dog in. Ooh, and hopefully not have the paper towel stick. All right, so that's all stuck down. So the front piece is done. Now we want to add our pocket on the inside. I'm going to lightly tack it on the back end, like on the reverse side, so that when I go to sew it in, it does not move around on me. All right, let's first figure out how big we're making this pocket. I think I want to go to there and trim off the bottom excess. It's going to go here, and what I think I'm going to do is just fold it over and do that to glue it down. That'll work. Now, the point of this is just to hold it down until I sew these two pieces, the front and the inside, together, because that is what I'm planning on doing. So this is just to keep it in place until I take it to my sewing machine. If you're making a cover and don't have a sewing machine, don't plan on using a sewing machine to sew it together, I would use more glue and be more, thorough in my glue job. But since all I'm worried about is it staying in place until I get it sewn together, I don't have to worry. And I'm going to cut off, there's excess bulk at the corners. I'm just going to cut off the excess. And put a little glue down just so that the corner stays neat. And I think I'm probably going to put book corners on after I sew everything together, so I'm not worried about how neat my corners are. Yeah, I just need to be neat enough that it'll look okay, but it doesn't have to be perfect. So yeah, just tacking it down so that it will stay in place while I am sewing the journal together. And then I'm going to glue the front and the back together so that it will stay together when I take it to my sewing machine. And what I'll do is sew all around. So yeah, I'm just going to put a little bit in the middle and see, because we stitched before we sewed the inside to the outside, all of the messy stitchiness of the back of the piece is going to be sandwiched under the inside of the piece so it won't show, if that makes any sense. So I'm just going to add some glue. As I said, the whole point is just to keep the front and back together when I take it to my sewing machine. And I'm just going to make sure I'm lined up at my edges. So there we go. And I'll trim off this little excess overhang we got going on over here very carefully. And I am going to use my sewing machine to sew the two pieces together. And then once I have it sewn together, I'll come back and show you. I am not going to stitch on camera because, one, I just don't have the ability to set that up so that you can actually see me stitching, and two, my sewing is kind of scary. Still have not fully mastered using my sewing machine, so yeah, I'm not going to do that on camera. I'll do that and I will be back. All right, I went to my sewing machine. I did a zigzag stitch. I cannot sew straight or even to save my life. You'll notice the stitching, because I'm not pushing it through at the right speed, I think, because I go very slow when I stitch. And yeah, I kind of go, wee, but you know, it's the imperfections that show it's handmade with love, right? And I ended up going with a brown because I didn't have any pink that I liked to go with it, or anything in, you know, this color family thread wise, because I have a set of already made up bobbins and matching threads that I picked up at Amazon because I just hate loading bobbins. It's such a pain in the neck. We've got a pocket inside, and once we sew the signature in and have a stitch through there, that'll keep that down so that the pockets have some tension. Oh, look at that. I apparently got threads stuck up all in here going across here. I don't know what the heck happened there. That's quite a bit of a mess. Go me. Yeah, hence I'm not showing you me sewing on my sewing machine because it tends to be a hot mess. But, all right, so I did want to add corner protectors to the piece. So I'm just going to add a little bit of fabric tack inside the piece just to make sure it stays on good. Then I'm going to put it over the corner and use pliers to crimp it down. And I'm going to do that for all four corners. So there we go. This cover is all done and ready for me to sew in the signature once I get that put together. So that's all for today. If you enjoyed this video, please do all the things that lets YouTube know you enjoyed the video. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave me a comment down below. Thanks for joining me, and happy crafting.